थोड़ी हवा ना मेरे पे आ नहीं रही है। Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to the session of Meezan lecture series. So, in this series, we are analyzing and studying and trying to understand the view of Ustaz Javed Ahmad Ghamidi regarding the contents of Islam. As you would be knowing, his book Meezan is basically his understanding of the contents of Islam. And we have studied various chapters, not in the same order as they occur in the book, but in different order. And ultimately, of course, the lectures will be arranged according to the order of the book. So currently, we are studying one of the preambles of the book, which relates to the fundamentals of an understanding religion. And of course, these include the status of the Prophet himself and how he has given us religion. And through him, as we have seen, that the these the contents of religion or Islam which provide us with certitude are just two. One of them is the Quran, and the other one is the Sunnah. And as far as the Quran and Sunnah are concerned, they stand in parallel, and we have discussed their principles of understanding. So today we'll be discussing the principles of understanding Hadith. Of course, we have also tried to explain a number of times that Hadith has been erroneously used as a synonym to Sunnah, whereas the two are entirely distinct. There is no connection between the one with the other. Sunnah, of course, refers to the established practice of the Prophet that he transferred from Prophet Abraham and then gave currency and transferred to his own followers. On the other hand, Hadith is the he's like it's like the record of the Prophet's history, his words, deeds, and tacit approvals. They are called Hadith, and what the one glaring difference between Hadith and Sunnah, besides many other, of course, is that the Sunnah is an established practice or established source of religion in which the Prophet made all-out effort to propagate and communicate it. On the other hand, Hadith basically is something that has been that can be clearly seen as an effort and an endeavor undertaken by the companions of the Prophet, and it has nothing to do with the Prophet's own initiative. So we will start the principles of understanding Hadith, but as I said, it's important to note that Hadith itself is something that is technically called Akhbar-e Ahad. So Akhbar-e Ahad, of course, refers to isolated reports or individual reports that have been transmitted from a few individuals to the next person in history. And of course, there are certain areas that need to be looked into because of the very nature of Hadith and but to define hadith, Ustaz Ghamidi has not, not at all come up with a new definition. It's the same definition that all our scholars of hadith they adhere to, and by technical parlance, hadith refers to the narratives which record the words, deeds, and tacit approvals of Prophet Muhammad. And it is absolutely evident that they do not add to the contents of Islam that are stated in the Quran and Sunnah. And in technical terms, they do not add any article of faith or any deed to religion. It has been stated that it has been understood that as far as the scope of hadith is concerned, it's as we have just referred to it earlier on, that it does not have an independent scope at all. This is a reality that the hadith literature is the largest and most important source. Besides the fact that it's something that never had the initiative of the Prophet, but still, it is the largest and perhaps a very important source which records the biography, history, as well as the exemplary life of the Prophet, the way he went about following religion. And also, it consists of invaluable explanations from him regarding various issues of religion. So, nonetheless, it occupies such great importance that no student of religion can in any way ignore it. And it is because of this importance of religion that it is essential to know the principles which help us in understanding them. But, however, before we actually look at these principles, we will first take a look at the grounds on the basis of which a hadith is accepted or rejected. So, remember, uh, before we understand a hadith, because of the fact that the nature of hadith is such that it has to be critically evaluated and analyzed to be an acceptable hadith. So once that happens, that you have analyzed a hadith and historically it can be considered to have a probable uh, certainty that it originated from the Prophet, then the next step comes that what are the principles that we will employ in understanding the hadith itself. So you can see that as far as the hadith is concerned, it consists of distinctly two parts. So one is the chain of narration, and the other is the text of the hadith. So as far as the chain of narration is concerned, we know that it can be attributed to the Prophet only if we are reasonably sure that the narrative consists of people who are reliable and who are without, the chain itself is without any flaws, and there's no hidden flaw in the chain of narration, which is, of course, called the ilal, the probity of the narrator's adl and their grasp and memory, which is called zabt. So, and besides this, we know that these important constituents of hadith criticism is that the hadith itself should be from a person who is a reliable person. He should have a reliable memory. And then, of course, the hadith should be contemporaneous, which means there should be ittisal between the various strands of hadith so that we are able to know that these are the strands in which the next narrator is someone who was contemporaneous or found in the same period as the previous narrator from which he was able to derive and further that hadith. So, besides that, we also know that it should not have any ilal. Ilal means that there should be no hidden defect in the hadith, and then of course the fact that there should be no shuzuz, which means that something that is against the in any way the Quran and the Sunnah, or as we will see, some of the important areas of the raya. So this is the standard which scholars of hadith have put forth for the examination of the chain of hadith. These are the five principles: adl, of course, and then we have zabt. Adl means the probity or the trustworthiness of a narrator. Zabt means that he has a good memory. Then we know that ittisal or contemporaneousness, which means the first narrator and the second narrator and the third narrator and so on and so forth. So the ittisal or the adjacent nature of a narrator with the previous one must be proven. I mean, they have to be living in the same time period. Otherwise, there could be the fact that the person is living much later than the person from which he is allegedly getting the information, which of course would be something which is against ittisal. And then there should be no illat, which means any hidden defect, and there should be no shuzuz. So these are the five uh, standards which these scholars have put forth. Ustad Ghamidi has not added anything to these standards, and he says that these standards are so sound that we have to apply these standards whenever it comes to the analysis of the chain of narration of a hadith. Also, since attributing something suspect to the Prophet can be of severe consequences in this world, of course, and in that to come, it is essential to apply the standard without any lenience. This is what he says. And with absolute impartiality to every narrative which is ascribed to Prophet Muhammad. So only those narratives should be considered acceptable which fully conform to this standard. No narrative which is ascribed to the Prophet, even if it is found in such primary works as Al-Jami' al-Sahih of Imam Bukhari, Al-Jami' al-Sahih of Imam Muslim, the Al-Muwatta of Imam Malik, they cannot be accepted if it is, in any way, something which is against these standards. So this is as far as the chain of narration of a hadith is concerned. Next, we come to the text of a narrative. So after investigating the chain of narration, This is the most important thing, that now we know that the content, what the content is and what the text is. So scholars of Hadith have left no stone unturned in investigating the characters and biographies of the narrators, and have spent a greater part of their lives in this research. But like every human endeavor, we know that natural flaws which still exist in the narration of a hadith require that two things must always remain in consideration while investigating the text of a hadith. And as you can see, they are being displayed before you. Ustad Ghamidi has put them forth, which means that number one, nothing in it should be against the Quran and Sunnah. And number two, nothing in it should be against established facts derived from knowledge and reason. So if anything, I mean, if the chain of narration, for example, is acceptable and we find that it conforms to the five standards that we've just referred to, but one of these standards which relates to the text of the hadith is violated, then the hadith will no longer be regarded as acceptable. So there should be nothing in the hadith that is against the Quran and Sunnah, and there should be nothing in the hadith which is against the established facts derived from knowledge and reason. If this happens, then I mean, anything of the two can invalidate the a particular narrative. So we have to understand that the Quran is the Meezan, which we already, I mean, discussed previously. It is the guardian of every concept of religion, and it has been revealed as a barometer to judge between right and wrong. And therefore, the fact that there should be nothing against the Quran is something. This is very, very, I mean, something which is very, very acceptable, and of course, it's something which is very natural and logical. Similarly, the hadith should not be against Sunnah, because whatever religion has been conceived or received through it is as certain and authentic as the Quran, and we've just discussed this. So just as the Quran was perpetuated or was delivered or communicated through the consensus of the Ummah and through the verbal perpetuation, in a similar manner, the Sunnah was transmitted through their consensus and their practical perpetuation. So they adhered to those practices and transferred. There's no difference between the level of authenticity of the Quran and Sunnah. So both are equally authentic. So this is something that is, absolutely clear. So therefore, if any hadith is against the Sunnah, it will not be accepted as well. Now, as far as the second point is concerned, which says that nothing which is against established facts derived from knowledge and reason, if there is anything against it, it should not be accepted. We know that the Quran has made it absolutely clear that its message is based on on established facts. Even its arguments on such basic issues as monotheism and the hereafter are primarily based on these facts. It is the requirements and demands of these facts which the Quran highlights through its teachings. Every student of the Quran is aware that it presents these facts as deciding factors for the message it put forth. It presents them as the final word, both before the idolaters of Arabia and the people of the book. So those who oppose these are regarded by it as people who follow their base desires. And what is included in them? Intuitive realities. So this is something which is proven through our intuition, is an established historical fact. Historical truths, so established history. Results of experience and observation. So again, these are all things which are discussed in the Quran in this very capacity. So how can a hadith which is against these facts, regarded by the Quran as ones which distinguish between the truth and untruth, be accepted? So it is obvious that it shall stand rejected. All leading scholars of hadith also hold this view, that it shall be rejected if it is against these established facts. And now Ustad Ghamidi has cited Khatib Baghdadi, who is actually a representative of the scholars of hadith in this regard. And you can see the text being displayed before you. It says, a khabar wahid cannot be accepted. Khabar wahid, hadith. A khabar wahid cannot be accepted, which is against sense and reason, is against an established and explicit directive of the Quran, is against a known sunnah, or is against a practice which is observed like the sunnah, or its conflict with some conclusive argument becomes absolutely evident. So you can see that these are those established facts against which no hadith can be accepted, and this is not something which Ustad Ghamidi has put forth for the first time. It is something that all scholars of hadith, and very ably represented here by Khatib Baghdadi, can be seen that they adhere to this. So far, if I sum up what we have discussed so far, is that these are the standards through which a hadith can be accepted or rejected. And standards, of course, they relate to the chain of narration, and that those standards are five. We've just discussed them, which will validate the historicity of a narrative. And next, we discussed the text of the narrative, which means that we must also evaluate the text of the narrative. And that text is something which should not contain anything which is against the Quran and Sunnah, and anything which is against established knowledge. So these are the standards of acceptance and rejection. Now a hadith is on our table. Once it passes through these two tests, it is now on our table. It has to be understood and reflected upon. So now we come to the principles of reflection, of understanding a hadith. Once it passes through this sieve of chain of narration and text, both, it passes through both these sieves, and now it is something that has to be understood. So for this, Ustaz Ghamidi says that there are five principles of understanding hadith, and these five are literary appreciation of the Arabic language, which is the first one; interpretation in the light of the Quran, this is the second one; understanding the occasion of the hadith, this is the third principle; the fourth one is the analysis of all the variant texts; and the fifth one is reason and revelation, which means, of course, that it should not be against reason and revelation. So, as far as the literary appreciation of the text is concerned, or the Arabic language is concerned, would have to know that just as the Quran has been revealed in literary Arabic, the language of Hadith too is highly literary Arabic. It is, of course, almost contemporaneous with the Quran. There is, or at least very near the period of the Quran. There is no doubt that a great number of ahadiths, we know, they have not been transmitted in their original words. They have not been there. They have been transmitted through the understanding of a narrator. But so whatever much has been preserved of the language of the Prophet and his companions, even through this instrument, is still enough for a keen student of the Quran to distinguish it from other material. So like the Quran, the language of the Hadith too has a certain standard which does not accept any adulteration of material substandard to it. So it is essential that by a continuous study of its language, students of Hadith are able to acquire enough skill of the language so as to reject certain narratives which are absolutely against the literary eloquence and the literary standard of the Quran. Ustad Ghamidi has given an example, and that is, of course, there is a narrative which says, "Ash-Sheikhu wa-Sheikha," and it has been translated as when a married man commits adultery with a married woman, then such and such punishment has to be given to those two. Farjumuhuma al-batat, which means that if they commit adultery, then they have to be stoned to death. And Ustaz has shown that how a sheikh wa sheikha is a word that cannot be translated the way it has been translated by people. It does not belong to the genre of Arabic language. The highly literary language of the Quraysh does not entertain it, and the way it has been used in hadith literature in certain ahadith is enough to make that hadith itself rejected, because for one, of course, this is something that is a very, very later use of the word. A sheikh or sheikha does not refer to this meaning of a person who is married. Of course, it means a person who is advanced in age, and to regard this to be a person who are married and using the word a sheikh or sheikha is absolutely something which cannot be in any way. I mean, it can be accepted. So if you have a good appreciation of the language of the Quran and Hadith, you'll know that there are certain narratives which, by their very nature, the very words they employ, the very constructions they employ, they make them invalid or unacceptable. The second standard which Ustaz Ghamidi has given as far as principles of understanding Hadith is that a Hadith must be interpreted in the light of the Quran. Now, the Hadith, of course, it occupies, the status which the Quran occupies has been, we have discussed this a number of times. So it is like the barometer, it's like the guardian, the final verdict on everything. So it is the most definitive, authentic record, actually, of whatever Prophet Muhammad did in his status of a prophet and a messenger. So most topics covered in the Hadith are related to the Quran, the way a branch is related to a stem, or the way an explanation is related to the text. So it's like an explanation. Without a recourse to the original text, it is obvious that its corollaries and explanations cannot be understood. So a hadith is mostly explaining the Quran. So if you don't, if it is against the Quran, how can it be accepted? It must explain what the Quran is. So Ustaz Ghamidi actually says that if all the mistakes in interpreting the hadith are minutely analyzed, they are intricately evaluated, the situation becomes abundantly clear. For example, he says that the incidents of stoning to death in the times of the Prophet, the assassination of Ka'b ibn Ashraf, the punishment meted out in the graves, narratives of intercession, narratives that speak that the Prophet has been ordained to kill people, the fact that apostasy is punishable by death. He says that all these issues have originated because these narratives, the way they are described, they have not been studied and interpreted in the light of the Quran. Of course, he has given a number of examples, and he's just indicated these examples that, for example, that if you look at some of the ahadith, and let's just concentrate on one of the examples that he's given. The rest, of course, will already be discussed in due course. For example, Umirtu an uqatil an-nas, the famous narrative which says that I have been asked to fight against people hatta yaqulu la ilaha, until they profess faith or they say la ilaha. So this would mean that people uh, who are not Muslims, they must be waged war against unless they accept Islam. And this has become part of our Muslim Sharia also. And Ustaz says that this is purely a case of not relating this narrative to the Quran and not interpreting this narrative in the light of the Quran, because in the light of the Quran, this narrative would solely relate to the immediate addressees of the Prophet, upon whom the Prophet himself had conclusively conveyed the truth, which is Imamul Hujjah. So to them it was said that if once accepting, if they have accepted faith, then if they accept faith, well and good. If they don't, then they will have to face the music, as they would say, or face the sword, because they have become punishable by death, because they are the ones who have arrogantly and defiantly rejected the truth. And now, if they belong to the idolaters of Mecca, then the punishment for idolatry will be implemented on them after the conclusive communication of the truth. It is the same punishment that they will face in the hereafter, but they will face it in this world as well. But only if a prophet of God or a messenger of God is there to convey this truth to them. So, in his interpretation, this related purely to the immediate addressees, and amongst those addressees, just the idolaters too. But by not relating it, for example, to the text of the Quran, now what has happened is that people think that this is like a absolute directive of the Quran, and wage war has been required by hadith that we wage war against people and kill them. And Ustaz has shown that this is, of course, a misunderstanding. Now let's come to the third principle. So the third principle is understanding the occasion of a hadith. So Ustaz says that a hadith must be understood with reference to the instance and occasion of the topic it records. So, I mean, we have to know that what was the occasion on which it was said, what was the background in which it was. I mean, whatever has been stated in it has been recorded, and then who are the addressees? If one does not address these questions in interpreting a hadith, on many occasions he fails to understand the occasion of a hadith. And then Ustaz has given a very befitting example of this misinterpretation, that if we do not understand the occasion of a hadith, the context of a hadith, we will end up making a false or a baseless interpretation. So one of the examples that he has given is of the famous narrative which says, Al-A'immatu min Quraysh, which means that the rulers of the Muslims, this is what the Prophet is reported to have said, that the rulers of the Muslims will belong to the Quraysh. Of course, referring to the fact that once he passes away, after him, it will be the Quraysh who would be or they will be the tribe of Quraysh from which the rulers should be selected or elected. So obviously, if you look at this narrative on the face of it, it does not. I mean, it's incomprehensible. So why would Prophet nominate a tribe, and that too his own tribe, as rulers? What if the person is not competent? What if the person is not fit to rule? So, what would make him qualified as a ruler? Is this the fact that because he belonged to his own clan or tribe? Of course, this would be the obvious result. And Ustaz has shown that this is absolutely an erroneous interpretation, because today also people say that a Muslim ruler must belong to the Quraysh tribe, and if it does not belong to the Quraysh tribe, then we are violating what the Prophet has said. So Ustad Ghamidi has shown that if you look at uh, the text of the Quran and the context of the Quran, it shows that after the Prophet, the system of government which the Quran had actually proposed, was shura, which means amruhum shura bainahum, or the system will be based according to the consultation of the Muslims. And the Prophet himself showed that if in this consultation, of course, this is an obvious fact, if there is a consensus after consulting the leaders or the people who are in authority, then whoever they choose, the ruler, would be the ruler. But in case of a difference of opinion, it is obvious that the opinion of the majority would prevail, because when you say that a principle has something to do with consultation, so if there is a difference in consultation, or there are people who are on one side and there are other people on the opposite side, then it is common sense that people who are in majority will prevail. So this is something which is a corollary of the Quran, that after the Prophet, amongst the various factions or parties, anyone that has the majority would be eligible to rule. Now, this is something which the Prophet had already said a couple of years before his demise, because he knew once Mecca had been conquered, that the Quraysh hold the status of being the majority. They were the people who held the confidence of the majority of Arabia. Had Mecca not been conquered, or let's say, had Mecca been conquered, and the last stage in which the Quran says, Yadkhuluna fi dinillahi afwaja, lots of people had not entered the folds of Islam, and Islam had not spread in Arabia, and had the Muslim empire been confined to Medina only, then, of course, the Ansar were the one who were in majority. But once it spread to whole of Arabia, it was the Quraysh or the Muhajirun who held the majority. And the Prophet, just to circumvent any untoward situation after him, specified that after him the leaders should be amongst the Quraysh, not because they belonged to his tribe, but he was just pointing out to the Muslims that they are in majority. And this automatically meant that this directive will remain in force as long as they enjoy the majority. If the Quraysh no longer enjoy the majority, the confidence of the majority, then they will no longer be eligible. So, in fact, al-aimmatu min Quraysh, the rulers will be from among the Quraysh, is just specifying the situation at the time of the Prophet's demise, or he thought that this is something that would continue after his demise. And instead of people fighting each other, and we know that right after his death, there was a big argument between the Ansar and the Muhajirun. And then we know that the Ansar had to be reminded that when the Prophet had passed away, that the Prophet had said earlier on, Al-Aimmatu min Quraysh, so that they are told that after his death, the people who stand in majority are the Quraysh, because of course we know that there was no balloting, there was no formal system of voting. So the Prophet, in his own sagacity, had pointed this out. So this is one example in which, if the Hadith is not interpreted in the light of the Quran, and its occasion is not understood, we'll end up interpreting it in a wrong way. And as I said, in a way that we think that, for example, as is the case of this Hadith, that a Muslim ruler must always be selected from the Quraysh. This would be the obvious inference if we don't take into context the occasion. And if we take into context the occasion, it would mean that it was a directive given for the times of the Prophet regarding the situation at that time, that the Quraysh held the majority. So therefore, there should be no discontent in this matter. Let's now come to the fourth principle. And this fourth principle says that analysis of all the variant texts. This means that all the variant texts of a hadith must be studied in order to form an opinion about it. So many a time a person may form an opinion about a hadith by not studying all the variants. He might just pick up a couple of variants and not take all the variants. Now, you see, a hadith, we know, is something that has been reported by people, and different people report different things about the same incident. And we have to reconstruct the context. And one of the ways to reconstruct this context is to gather all the variations of the same narrative. We'll have somewhat of a complete picture of that narrative. And this is something that will make us easier to understand. And Ustaz Ghamidi has actually cited a very telling example, which tells us that if we don't look into all the variants of a hadith, we might end up taking a wrong or making a wrong interpretation. So the example that he has given in this regard is the hadith that supposedly explicitly prohibits the pictures of all living beings. And if we look at that, we might end up proscribing, and that is actually what has happened. That our hadith scholars have ended up prohibiting all pictures that are that are life forms, and only lifeless pictures are allowed by them, because there is a hadith which says that the Prophet will, on the day of judgment, they will be asked to inject life in in things that they would draw, and they would say that this is the thing that you drew, so now you are trying to copy the creation of God, and so therefore they thought that all pictures that are of life forms are forbidden. Now, the true story is that if we collect all these narratives, we will find an entirely different picture, and we'll find that there is a certain type of pictures that is being prohibited. It's not that, I mean, if you look at a certain category of narrative, you'll feel as if all kinds of pictures are being prohibited. But if you look at all the narratives, you'll find it's not all the pictures that are being prohibited, it's just a certain kind of pictures. And if a further focus is made on those kinds of pictures will realize that these were the pictures of idols that were worshipped at the times of the Prophet. And those pictures, of course, would be instruments of idolatry. So therefore, the Prophet had said, do not make such pictures. Hazihi sur, tilka sur, referring to the fact that it's not all the pictures, it's only certain kinds of pictures. So that would clearly mean that because idolatry was needed to be put an end to, so just as statues of idols were regarded as prohibited, so pictures that were made of deities were also regarded as prohibited. So you see, the whole occasion and the background changes if you look at all the variant texts. If you don't look at all the variant texts, you'll come to the conclusion that all types of pictures are prohibited, and hence this is what has been understood. And people regard all kinds of pictures to be prohibited, and they think that making a picture or taking a picture is haram in Islam. Whereas if you look at the occasion and look at all the variant texts, you'll see that the rest of the variant texts are speaking of a specific kind of pictures, not all kinds of pictures, and they are the ones whom the people of Arab worshipped. And of course, they became instruments of worship, and that is why they are prohibited. So you see, such a sea change comes about if we analyze the hadith according to all its various texts. Finally, the fifth example, or the fifth principle, I would say, of understanding hadith, which Ustaz Ghamidi has put forth, can be cited as reason and revelation. So what does this mean? It actually means that a hadith cannot contradict reason or revelation. So we have already discussed the principles when we were talking about the principles of acceptance or rejection of a hadith, that religion is based on universally established facts derived from knowledge and reason. And if a hadith appears to be contradicting these facts, it must be deliberated repeatedly. However, summarily rejecting a hadith, if it appears to be against these facts, is not the correct academic approach. I mean, we just cannot do it immediately. We must deliberate. Similarly, ignoring these facts and accepting an insubstantial interpretation of the hadith should also not be the case. So experience shows that when a narrative is analyzed in the correct perspective, then many a time no contradiction remains. And this can only be achieved if we understand and interpret a hadith, which is something which is not against established facts of science and knowledge. And an example of this can be given as the height of Prophet Adam. We know that it has been mentioned in certain narratives that his height was 70 cubits, which is like 60 cubits, 60 yards, which is like 180 feet. And again, this is something that, I mean, cannot be supported in any way, archaeologically or historically. And also, when we analyze this hadith, it comes to mind that this is, and actually in addition, in the narrative, no correct narrative actually mentions the height of Adam as being 60 cubits or 180 feet. Again, as I said, that one of the reasons being that it cannot be conflicting with established norms of knowledge and reason. So these are the five principles of understanding hadith which Ustaz Ghamidi has put forth. Right before them, when he talked about the principles of acceptance and rejection, he actually relied completely on contemporary scholars. He has not made any new addition to that. He has said that we will accept a hadith if it satisfies the principles of textual and isnad criticism. And once it passes through that sieve, then we will deliberate on the text of the narrative in the light of these five principles and then try to understand them. So I will now stop here because we've come to an end to this topic, and inshallah in our future sessions we'll be discussing some of the other important areas of his book. And so now if you have any questions regarding what we've discussed today, you may raise them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question comes from Shabnam. Shabnam, please go ahead.
जी थैंक यू मरियम सर एक्चुअली ये हदीस के आपने जो 5 क्राइटेरिया बताए सर एक बहुत फेमस हदीस है जो कि ऑथेंटिक भी कही जाती है कि जिसमें प्रॉफिट ने कुछ लोगों को जो सबब ऑफ मदीना में गालिबन रह रहे थे भेजा और वो किसी शायद बीमारी में मुब्तला थे तो प्रॉफिट सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने उन्हें कहा कि आप ऊंट का यूरिन पिए तो उन्हें पिया तो वो शिफायाब हो गए तो सर मुझे कभी भी ये ऑथेंटिक नहीं लगी और मुझे अक्ल के
this I know. So this is a famous narrative and has been misinterpreted. And if you will look at some of our works at our website, it has been clarified that this narrative has been grossly misinterpreted. And as far as the urine of the camels is concerned, it was not meant to be drunk. It was actually meant to be applied to certain injuries and wounds that the Arabs contracted in their wars, because it has certain therapeutic and medical, I would say, benefits. So that's an entirely different area. And I think if you can look at some of our work that has already been displayed on our websites, you'll come to note that how this narrative has been misinterpreted.
सर वो तो सर अप्लाई करना भी इज वेरी वेरी पाकीज़गी के अगेंस्ट तो वो मुझे तो नहीं लग रहा कि ये ऐसे भी होना चाहिए.
So you see,
हम आज
this
भी
is what
लगा सकते हैं.
this is what your I can say that your taste would say. I mean, our taste would say that this is something that is unacceptable and unacceptable. But I mean, we still have to find out that what exactly is the meaning of that hadith. I mean, if it is, for example, textually correct and properly reported. So this is something that we have done in our institute and seen that it has been correctly reported from the Prophet, but the meaning has been grossly misinterpreted. He never meant that the urine has to be drunk. He was actually referring to the application of the urine on the wounds of a certain person who would get injured.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Salman Aziz, you're up next. Please go ahead.
So in the first slide, it was said that it should not be in contradiction to the Hadith, should not be in contradiction to Quran and the Sunnah. But it appears to be a very broad statement because in all these sects of Islam, even the most extremist, they take their logic and authority from Quran, sir. So it becomes a very broad statement of everybody must be having its own interpretation of the Quran. So
Right.
please elaborate.
Actually, you see, what you need to understand is that there would be people who would be, trying to use the language or the reasoning of the Quran and Sunnah and their support. So it's very easy to judge between various interpretations. If you just analyze the reasoning, all that you need to do is that if there are people who are saying contradictory things about the same Quranic verse maybe or a particular hadith, they would be arguing something in favor of their own point of view, isn't it? I mean, they're not going to force you to accept something. So all that you need to do is understand their conflicting opinions and follow the one that makes most sense. And it's not just the case with just hadith, it's the case with all interpretations, whether it's the Quran itself as well. So if you take the Quranic verse, you'll find 3 or 4 opinions regarding the same verse, and at times they would be conflicting. So what's the way forward? The way forward is to analyze those opinions and find which one of them convinces you intellectually.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Salman Aziz, if you have a follow-up question, you may raise your hand again. Umar, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर. सर ये मैंने पूछना था कि ये जो अहदीस का जो भी मजमुआ है, इसके अलावा भी क्या उस जमाने में जो हमारे
Is closer
स्कॉलर्स थे,
to our
कोई
heart
और भी इस
should
तरह
be
का काम किया गया है जिसको इतनी मशहूरी नहीं मिली?
आप किस हदीस की मजमूए की बात कर रहे हैं?
सर ये जो बुखारी और ये जो है, इसके किसी और जगह पे कोई ऐसा काम भी हुआ है इसी तरह का हिस्टोरिकल जिसको शायद इतनी मशहूरी नहीं मिली या कुछ ऐसा?
There have been several works of hadith in the first 3 centuries, and some of them have stood the test of time because of the fact that they were accepted by people because of their standard on merit, of course. And there are several others that just fell away in oblivion. And you'll find these narratives, I mean, these books still found, for example, the Musnad of Tayalsi, the Sahih of Ibn Khuzaimah, the Al-Jami al-Kabir of Tabrani, Al-Mujam al-Kabir of Tabrani. So there are several such works which don't, I mean, have the same standard of scholarship, I would say, or same level of criticism as these 6 canonical works of hadith that have become more famous. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that they don't contain, I mean, there are fragments of truth in them as well, fragments of a lot of correct narratives. So, I mean, all that you can say is that some of these books have become famous because of the standard of scholarship. Otherwise, there are, and they still exist, several other hadith works that are of secondary nature, and they don't have the same level of scholarship.
Omar, do you have a follow-up?
I have a different question, can I ask? Not
Oh,
related to the topic.
no, I'll recommend sticking to the topic for now. If we still have
Okay,
some
sure.
time, we might be able to take non-topic related questions.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Thank you. In the meantime, I'm going to ask the participants to please raise their hand if they have topic-related questions. Dr. Saleem, I had a question regarding different regions that follow different imams when it comes to hadith. Why is it that they choose to like not mix and match? For example, Salafis, only following certain imam, Shafi'is or Malikis and so on.
So, I mean, this is not just the case with hadith. In fact, it is seldom the case with hadith. This is more the case with juristic approaches. So, these imams are imams of jurisprudence, which means fiqh. And because of the fact that our scholars have given us this fatwa or this edict that you should follow one imam as far as jurisprudence is concerned, and people have just stuck to this fatwa. Otherwise, in this case, especially I would say in the case of the Quran, actually, you should follow your reasoning, the reasoning that has been put forth regarding the understanding of a Quranic verse. And I mean, there could be two situations. Either a person is not even equipped to compare between two interpretations, which is seldom the case. In that case, he can trust a person of, I mean, any person that he can trust, any scholar that he can trust. But if he is, I mean, intelligent enough, I can say, or has the wherewithal of comparing different interpretations, then I mean, he needs to look at what are the contesting opinions and what are the reasoning behind these contesting opinions, and then, of course, selecting the one which he thinks is closest to his intellectual understanding.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We don't seem to have any more topic-related questions, but we still
Okay,
have about 15 minutes remaining.
okay. So we can have general questions.
All right. Omar, please go ahead.
जी सर, मैंने पूछना था कि अगर कोई कुरानिक अरबिक पढ़ना चाहे, उसको समझना चाह रहा हो, तो उसके लिए कोई आप रेकमेंड करेंगे कि वो कुछ स्पेसिफिक पार्ट से शुरू करे कुरान के, या वो कहीं से भी शुरू कर सकते?
See, understanding Quranic Arabic itself is an independent task, which means that you must know Quranic Arabic through a website or a teacher or an app. And there are several apps and websites, and of course, scholars are always there to teach you. So they use the Quran as a text, the Hadith as a text to teach you. So it all depends who you go to. I recommend there are apps available on your iStore and your Play Store in which you can understand, I mean, at least learn Quranic Arabic so that when the Quran is being read or heard, you're able to understand it. So when they teach you Quranic Arabic, they use the Quranic text as a reader, so that you're able to fluently understand the Quran. So it's just a question of selecting from among the various apps that are available.
जी सर, वो डॉक्टर खालिद सही साहब का जो कोर्स है इंट्रोडक्शन टू कुरानिक अरबिक, तो वो मैंने थोड़ा पढ़ के, तो अभी मैंने कुरान को डायरेक्ट समझना शुरू कर दिया है। तो वो मैं इसलिए कि
Okay.
चाह रहा था कि अगर आप रेकमेंड करते,
Means,
उसमें
I
मैं
mean, the
चैट
best
जीपीटी
way,
वगैरह
yes,
इस्तेमाल
I think the best way would be that you select from chapter number 6, which is Surah Qaf, the 50th surah onwards.
जी, थैंक यू सर।
Thank you very much. Akram Batisa, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Well,
Sir, I am never clear absolute clear about Mu'tazilas. All I know is that they said Quran is there was a discussion that Quran is a creation of Allah Ta'ala or narration. So could you please explain briefly that what are the Mu'tazilas? Do they still exist?
they hardly exist, and this is a debate that went on in the times of the caliphs, the Umayyad caliphs, regarding the createdness and the non-createdness of the Quran, and it's virtually, I mean, extinct now. And Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal was forced to profess this belief that the Quran is a created. Uh, I mean, it's something created, and it's whether it's Kalamullah, whether it's the Khalqullah. That has been a debate that has long passed, and I would suggest that. I mean, you can just type Mu'tazilites in your on your Google, and you can just read about them. So they have 6 principles, and amongst them, of course, is this createdness of the Quran. And then we have a principle regarding who is going to go to hell and heaven, and what are the conditions of being a Muslim. So these are ancient discussions that no longer apply. But if you wish to read about them, you just need to type Mu'tazilites, because their opposites are the Asharites. So the two opposing factions were the Mu'tazilis and the Asharis. So one of them believed in determinism, the other one believed in fatalism, which means that it believed that every action of a person has already been preordained by God, and you are compelled to act what God has thought about you. And the other one says, fatalism says, no, it's something that God has never ordained, and I decide whatever I have to do, and no one can interfere in that. So it is these kinds of debates that went on in the 3rd century when this was all happening, and they don't have any reflection today.
Okay. And last thing is that it was Imam Humble slashed to death almost just because of for this reason.
Yes, that was the reason. He was forced actually to believe that that the Quran has been created. But I don't think I'm not absolutely sure whether it was this thing that took his life or not. You need to recheck. However, I know that he was punished for this, for not accepting. But the next caliph actually revoked this thing, because you see, at the state level they adopted this doctrine of createdness of the Quran. And I think it was Motasim, the next caliph, who revoked this, and he let go of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. But whether he died in captivity or because of this punishment is something that you need to verify.
Oh, I read that he was punished and there was a gouge in his skin because of lashing.
Yeah. So
and
that
then
was another thing.
developed
So that
cancer.
was like indirect death, not directly because of
Yes.
imprisonment.
Thank you very much, Jazakallah. That's enough for me. Thank you, appreciate it.
Shabnam, you're up next. Please go ahead.
जी, थैंक यू मरियम सर। मैंने कुछ साल पहले कुरानिक हिस्ट्री पे आपके कुछ लेक्चर्स अटेंड किए थे सर। उसमें आपने थोड़ा मेंशन किया था कि अफ्रीकन कंट्रीज में कुछ और गालिबन कुछ रैंडम थोड़े बहुत और मुस्लिम कंट्रीज में कुरान में ऑल्ट्रेशंस पाई जाती हैं और वो उसी तरह तिलावत करते हैं अपनी नमाज में भी, और वो शायद
जी।
बहुत मेजर बातें हैं, गालिबन विरासत भी, इनहेरिटेंस भी है उसमें या जो भी। तो सर हाउ कैन वी क्लेम कि कुरान इज एन अनऑल्टर्ड जस्ट बिकॉज मतलब कि ये ज्यादा मतलब मोस्टली ये प्रिवेल करती है वर्जन, इस बेस पे हम कह रहे हैं सर unaltered तो ना
I
हुआ
think
कुछ?
this is slightly a technical subject, and it's a little more detailed than that. And I've given a number of talks on this subject. So I would suggest that either you listen to those talks or read some of the material that has been written. I have written 2 books. One of them is a very comprehensive one, and that is, of course, a little technical as well. But there is a summary and a abridged form of that also, which is called History of the Quran, a concise study. You can read that as well to get your answer. I mean, there's a simple answer, which of course would not satisfy you, and there is a detailed answer. I think if you need a detailed answer, it would be best if you either listen to those talks or maybe read this book.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adil Qureshi, please go ahead.
Sir, this ikama that we do before the start of the prayer, where did it come from? Is it hadith? Is it sunnah? Is it something else?
Well, that's a good question. I think it is, if I am not wrong, it is an established sunnah, but I need to reconfirm. I think it's an established sunnah, and it is something that has been transmitted as an established sunnah.
Right. And
It's not from hadith.
some people say twice Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Some people say only once Allahu
Both
Akbar.
are fine. Both are fine because we find both these practices from the Prophet.
Okay, sir.
But I'll have to reconfirm whether it's a sunnah or a hadith, but I think it's an established sunnah.
Right, but I didn't find it in the list of sunnahs that Ghamidi Sahab.
Actually, what you'll find in the list is the prayer, and you see the prayer is something that is it's not just one title. It has things appended to it. But nevertheless, I'll check on my part as well.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Calling for more questions. We still have about 9 minutes. If not, then we'll end the session early. Okay, so Nazis, please go ahead.
अच्छा सर, गांधी साहब ने को तो जो है वो मजाक के अंदाज में कहा था कि क़यामत के दिन जब किसी के सवाल जवाब होंगे तो उससे पूछा जाएगा भाई किस बात पे आपकी मगफिरत करें, तो उसने कहा कि मैं मीजान पढ़ के आया हूँ, तो अगर फरिश्ता कहेगा कौन सा एडिशन, अब जो भी ये मिल रहे हैं सर, इसमें मतलब कौन सा एडिशन इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, और वैसे इनके मुख्तलिफ एडिशन में जो है वो क्या फर्क है मेजर, इसमें काइंड गाइड कर सकें.
So you see, currently I think we are on the 16th edition, and so it has gone 16 revisions in the last. Meezan was completed in 2007, so this would mean that in the last 18 years or 17 years, it has been revised 16 times. So on occasions these are very major, revisions, and on certain other occasions they got more to do with punctuation and sentence construction. And it's difficult to, have a whole history of what has been changed and evolved. But I think our department, the editing department, has all these historical details that which edition has been changed and what is the extent of change. So, this is what an author does when he starts re-evaluating his work and rethinking his work. So he comes up with revisions, he comes up with at times new ideas, or he thinks that his previous ideas need to be revised or maybe discarded. And I think it's a natural process. But if you ask me what are the major revisions, I can point you out to some of the major revisions, but you see, this is something because of the fact that they have taken place in our own lifetime. At times, we don't tend to remember the revisions themselves because we are living in the latest revision era, so to speak. And so, maybe if you would like to know more of the revisions, you might need to have recourse to our editing department, which has these compiled up. And in fact, there is a project that someone may be undertaking in which this evolution of thought of Ustad Ghamidi and Meezan will be traced. So that would be a more academic study, edition-wise, and why these changes were made and what made him rethink. So that is, of course, a matter of independent study itself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Shabnam, please go ahead.
जी सर, ये जो मीजान और अल बयान का सर मुझे आई थिंक इनका इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन हो चुकी है, तो सर क्या ये सही है? और अगर सर मे आई नो कि ये किसने की है इसकी ट्रांसलेशन, अगर हो गई है तो?
So both have been translated and I am the culprit.
Thank you so much, sir. Jazakallah.
Thank you very much. Bisma, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. So Hajj is coming up and I had a question. Is there any specific dua, as I was researching on it, it says that, Allah loves the fact when people make it more personal. But I don't see very many specific duas. It's more Quran reading or
Yes,
nafal
yes.
or, just personal. Is that correct, or is there anything?
That's correct. That's correct. Very few, du'as have been prescribed, and it has mostly been left to your own self. Because if you communicate in your own language, as per your feelings and emotions, which arise differently at different times, so that is the best way to connect to God. But still,
Okay.
there are Quranic du'as that you can say. As I said, that is that you can repeat them, you can understand them. But as I said, these are ones that can be of help to you to express your emotions. It's not that they have been prescribed by the Sharia.
Right. Okay. Got it. Got it. So they're basically more giving voice to what we may be wanting to ask,
Yes,
but of course, okay. Got it.
correct, correct. And for that, you will have certain du'as that you can use from the Quran actually.
Okay, got it. And then what about just the recitation of the Quran in just sitting there and reciting? Is that
I
a
mean,
form of?
of course, I by that I would mean that you are trying to recite the Quran by understanding what it says with a
Right,
translation. Otherwise,
right.
of course, that is something which is highly recommended.
Okay. Okay. But so my question is, do you what does one, because we always, since especially we started taking classes from
Mm-hmm.
you, so we try to understand the Quran in the
Mm-hmm.
language that we understand. But my thought
Mm-hmm.
process was that if you're sitting at the Kaaba, because the Quran was revealed in Arabic, just
Mm-hmm.
because it was revealed in the language that God has revealed it, so it's His book. Would
Hmm.
that just, even if you just narrated it just in a way where it gave you peace in the language in Arabic, would that also be something that we can do?
What is the purpose for that? I mean, if you would like
Okay.
peace, the best thing is to connect with God by merely repeating the words of the Quran without understanding them. I mean, it's just a
Right.
way of psychologically telling you that you're reading the word of God, and that's all. I mean,
Okay.
it's not of any use except that you draw some psychological satisfaction, and that too because you've programmed yourself that you're doing something holy. Otherwise, you have to. I think you should make the best out of your time if you're going there by having a meaningful relationship with God.
Okay. So basically, understanding in the language, basically listening
Yes.
to the translation or reading it, the
Correct.
translation. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so much,
much.
Dr. Salim. Appreciate that.
We have a question that's asking, why is dhikr seen as a traditional ritual rather than spiritual help? And why does Al-Mawdid not give dhikr that importance?
That you have to ask Al-Marid. I mean, I'm just a part of Al-Marid. I am just an academic. I mean, I would say academic part of the whole institution. But by the way, I can say this that recently they have restructured, or we have restructured Al-Marid, and there is this instruction and grooming part that has been added to it in the form of a center for grooming, and they call it Khanqa, which means your own character, your conduct, your personal life. If you'd like, you can get an appointment with some scholar. You can go and visit the place. It's also available online. So that is something that has just been started. I think it started last year, and the knowledge that I have is that there is a person available every evening in the institute for this very purpose.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Umar, you're the last question of the day. Please go ahead.
थैंक यू। जी सर, मैंने पूछना था कि ये जब हम अल्लाह से दुआ करते हैं कि या अल्लाह मुझे इस मामले में या हर मामले में सबसे बेस्ट जो दुनिया और आखिरत के लिए वो दे दें, तो सर उसके बाद फिर समझ नहीं आती कि उससे बेहतर फिर क्या दुआ हो सकती है।
I mean, this is just a question of at times expressing your feelings in different ways. At times, you just want a concise sentence. At times, your heart and emotions are such that you would like to talk to God more. So it's just a question of what time, what situation, what feelings you have. And I think that is why we have to realize that we are not always in the same frame of mind. Sometimes we just want to utter one sentence, and that what should suffice when we say Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana. That is a very beautiful, concise prayer. And at times we want to go into details. So we have both options available according to our own mental state.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all the questions today. Thank you for another wonderful session. And thanks to all the participants for coming through. Inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.